constituted a potential criminal offense, and I made it clear in no uncertain terms that I was prepared to press charges if it continued. This wasn't just a neighborly disagreement anymore. This was a test of who controlled the narrative. Was I going to let Peyton's petty tyranny dictate how I honored my father's legacy? Not a chance. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around 2 weeks later, the vinyl wrap had arrived. And let me tell you, it was glorious. Caleb had outdone himself. The boat gleamed under the sun, now fully coated in white and navy print featuring the full text of the Lakeside Estates HOA bylaws, highlighted sections included. He'd even added a gold seal on the stern that read, "Compliant, petty, but compliant." I parked it proudly in the driveway with floodlights aimed directly at it at night, and a motion-triggered speaker that politely recited, "Welcome, neighbor. Have you read your bylaws today?" Within 24 hours, I was getting texts from neighbors I hadn't even met yet. Some were laughing. Some sent photos. A few even thanked me. But Peyton, she was furious. She stormed back onto my porch the very next day, folder in hand again. But this time her sharp tone was slightly tremulous. "Mr. Lawson, this mockery of our standards is unacceptable," she snapped. I calmly offered her a glass of iced tea. "Which bylaw am I violating, Peyton? Section and clause, please. I've had them all printed. You can double-check." She was shaking with rage, and for a moment I could see the gears turning in her mind. She wasn't just annoyed. She felt outplayed. Her grip on the community was starting to slip, and my passive-aggressive yet rule-abiding protest was a direct threat to her authority. That night, I noticed a small black car slowly driving past my house multiple times. At first, I brushed it off. But when I found a strange device, later confirmed to be a motion-sensitive trail cam, hidden in the bushes near my mailbox, I knew things had crossed into dangerous territory. Dahlia confirmed my suspicions the next day. Peyton had hired a private investigator. That's when it got real. I filed a police report for trespassing and unauthorized surveillance, but I also realized I needed to gather my own evidence. Ezra, ever the cunning old lawyer, advised me to install my own security, cameras, and begin documenting everything. "Let her dig her own grave," he said. "You're just giving her the shovel." Over the next few weeks, I caught multiple instances of Peyton and her clipboard cronies lurking near my property, sometimes under the cover of night. One particularly bold moment was when someone, likely hired by her, tried to unscrew the floodlight illuminating the ugly boat. Fortunately, my newly installed cameras caught it all. The breaking point came when someone attempted to break into my garage late one Friday night. The cops arrived just minutes after my alarm was triggered. While the suspect wasn't caught, the incident prompted a deeper investigation into what had started as a petty HOA dispute. And then, that's when things unraveled for Peyton fast. A detective on the case took a particular interest in the HOA's internal finances after seeing how militant Peyton had become over a simple boat. When they subpoenaed HOA records, turns out Peyton had been rerouting funds, community maintenance money, into a shell company registered under her nephews. Dahlia, Ezra, and I handed over everything we had. Every document, every recorded HOA meeting, every detail of her harassment and intimidation tactics. And when the authorities finally moved in, she was charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and criminal misuse of HOA funds. The neighborhood was stunned. Half the residents didn't even know they were footing the bill for Peyton's personal vendettas. She was ousted. The HOA board was restructured and new elections were held. Guess who got nominated to the new board? Not me, Dahlia. She accepted on the condition that Ezra be appointed as legal advisor. Together, they began rewriting the community guidelines with actual fairness, transparency, and accountability. As for me, I kept the boat right where it was. And every weekend I sat beside it, sanding and painting, finally restoring it like I'd promised Dad. One afternoon, a young neighbor boy wandered over. He pointed at the boat and asked, "Why does it have all that writing on it?" I smiled. Because sometimes the best way to fight back is to let the rules speak for themselves. He looked confused for a moment, then grinned. "Can I help you paint it?" I handed him a brush. "Sure, but only if you read Section 3.4 first." If you made it this far, you're officially part of Team Ugly Boat. Drop it in the comments if you've ever had to deal with a petty HOA. And remember, no matter how small the battle may seem, when something matters to you, it's worth standing up for. To Dahlia, being challenged was an insult. She made it clear she'd escalate things because, in her world, losing face was more dangerous than losing reason. But what I didn't know then was that Peyton already had a plan B, and it would take this entire ridiculous situation to a level of absurdity I hadn't even imagined. The HOA meeting was set for the first week of July. I made sure to arrive early. The community center was already buzzing, packed wall to wall with residents, each curious about what had become the neighborhood's hottest scandal, the boat incident. As I stepped in, I scanned the room, mentally cataloging the factions that had formed. In one corner sat the Peyton loyalists, mostly older residents who had lived here the longest and quietly benefited from her. Selective enforcement. Near the back were the newer homeowners exchanging wary glances like kids on the first day of school. And then there were the others, those who had tasted Peyton's wrath firsthand over everything from mailbox paint to minor lawn decor. Their tight posture and furrowed brows told me exactly where their loyalties lay. Peyton stood at the front, cool and commanding as always, her voice slicing through the chatter as she called the meeting to order. When the IT agenda reached aesthetic violations, property devaluation, the lights dimmed. Peyton clicked the remote, unveiling a slideshow of photos, my boat in all its alleged horror. Each photo seemed chosen for maximum disgrace. Chipped paint, uneven tarp, awkward angles that made it look like a junkyard relic. It was theatrically damning. As you can see, she said with solemn gravity, this eyesore is directly impacting property values and compromising the standards we've all worked so hard to uphold. I watched the crowd closely. Many nodded on reflex, conditioned fear disguised as agreement. But a few faces stiffened. Margaret Benson, a quiet woman seated in the second row, who I later learned had lived here for 15 years, raised her hand gently. I don't mean to be difficult, Peyton, she said, but I'm not sure how Mr. Lawson's boat is any different from the Johnsons' RV that was parked in their driveway all last summer. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Peyton's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. The Johnsons had a special permit, she said dismissively. I noticed confused glances between board members. Apparently that was news to them. Then Thomas Wright, a middle-aged father from 2 blocks over, chimed in from the back. I thought the rules said vehicles were allowed as long as they weren't up on blocks or visibly broken down. The boat looks old, sure, but it's in decent shape. Peyton's tone hardened as she tapped her manicured nails on the podium. We're not here to relitigate past enforcement, she snapped. We're dealing with a current visible violation. But the room was shifting. Samantha Miller, one of the newer homeowners, raised her hand. She'd recently gotten a violation notice for her collection of garden gnomes. I just want to understand how enforcement works, she said. When I asked to see the rule against lawn ornaments, I was told it fell under general aesthetic harmony. Is that what's being used here too? Whispers spread through the crowd like dry grass catching flame. Peyton's plan to publicly shame me was backfiring, fast. Instead of uniting the room against me, she'd triggered something far worse: doubt. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I'd like to request the specific bylaw that prohibits boats in driveways. Kelly Thompson, the HOA secretary, fumbled nervously through her documents as Peyton glared daggers. I'm not finding one that specifically bans boats, Kelly stammered. There's section 7.3 about keeping properties visually harmonious but nothing about watercraft. Several heads swiveled toward Peyton. Her cheeks flushed. Her voice rose half a pitch. The spirit of the bylaws clearly forbids unsightly vehicles, which would obviously include boats, she barked. But just to clarify, we'll be drafting an amendment. A formal vote will be required to ban watercraft explicitly, 2/3 majority. Then came a voice that stopped the room cold. Point of order. Everyone turned. Frank Kensington, a retired judge who rarely attended meetings, was sitting near the back. He folded his hands and looked directly at Peyton. You can't retroactively fine someone for violating a rule that doesn't exist. That's not governance, even at the HOA level. Several people nodded. Peyton's supporters were shifting, in their seats now, uncertain. Then came the knockout. During a heated exchange about enforcement transparency, Richard Barnes, the board vice president and longtime Peyton lackey, slipped up. Badly. Well, Peyton already authorized the payment. To that security firm, he froze, realizing what he'd just said. Ellen Hartman, an accountant with a reputation for meticulous scrutiny, shot up. Wait, you hired a private security firm with HOA funds? Where was that in the monthly report? Richard looked at Peyton, panicked. Peyton stepped in, cold and clipped. It was categorized under security measures, a standard line item, but Ellen was already flipping through her binder. Security measures are for the pool, gate, and parking lights. This sounds like you used community funds to spy on a resident. Now the crowd erupted. Conversations sparked in every corner. Even the staunchest loyalists looked disturbed. Then came the emotional gut punch. Mrs. Henderson, whose husband had served on the board before his passing, rose shakily with her cane. In 30 years, she said, I've never seen anything like this. We're neighbors, not a police state. Her voice was soft but carried more weight than anything said all night. I caught Dahlia's eye across the room. She gave me a slow, subtle nod. The tide was turning. Peyton tried to wrap the meeting in a rush, claiming the board would review matters internally and issue further guidance, translation, stall, and regroup. But as I walked home, adrenaline still pulsing, I found an envelope under my front door. Inside, printed copies of the HOA's financial statements and meeting minutes, and a handwritten note. Not everyone is on Peyton's side. K. It had to be Kelly. The documents showed suspicious payments under community enhancement, vague terms masking targeted surveillance. But I had no time to dwell on it. Caleb had just called. The vinyl wrap's ready? You still want the reveal tomorrow morning? You bet, I said. She's not ready for what's coming. 3 days later, Caleb arrived at dawn. Together, under the pink morning light, we carefully applied the vinyl wrap to every visible inch of the boat. The transformation was unbelievable. From a distance, the vessel now resembled an official HOA exhibit, complete with enlarged logo on the bow, full legal text excerpts printed across the hull, and a caption on the stern that read, Compliant by design, dedicated to the spirit of the bylaws. By 8 a.m., the sidewalk was filling with curious neighbors. A few took selfies. A family even set up lawn chairs across the street, watching. Like it was a live sitcom. Then came Trevor Wilson, a young content creator known for exposing outrageous HOA stories online. Dude, he said, eyes wide. This is pure genius. Can I film? Be my guest, I said. Caleb stepped back, arms folded, grinning from ear to ear. This might be the most satisfying job I've ever done, he said. It's like a floating middle finger wrapped in legal code. He wasn't wrong. Just after 9 a.m., a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt. Peyton stormed out, jaw clenched, heels clicking furiously up my driveway. She stopped cold at the sight of the newly wrapped boat, now looking like a floating, bureaucratic monument. What do you think you're doing? She hissed, her voice trembling with rage. I didn't answer, because at that moment I didn't need to. In the neighborhood, Trevor had captured it all on video. By that afternoon, the clip of the defaced boat, branded with Peyton's HOA threats, had gone viral across multiple social media platforms, sparking outrage and attracting interest from several regional news outlets. Peyton retreated into her house and immediately called for an emergency HOA board meeting, branding the situation as a community crisis. But the real crisis was just beginning, for her. That evening, I received a quiet phone call from Ezra. You should see what Peyton doesn't want anyone to find out, he said. It's about the HOA finances. When Ezra brought over the folder of documents he'd been quietly collecting, I was stunned. This wasn't petty rule enforcement anymore. This was something darker, something criminal. Within those files was evidence that Peyton had been systematically siphoning HOA funds for personal use. A lavish trip to Paris was disguised as landscape architecture research. Thousands in spa treatments were billed as community wellness initiatives, and it wasn't a one-time lapse. This stretched back 3 years, carefully masked with falsified line items and ambiguous wording. A week after the boat's viral debut, and over 1 million views later, Peyton launched her counterattack. I received a certified letter from her attorney, Harold Griffin, threatening to sue me for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, demanding $250,000 in damages. The letter was pure intimidation, thick with legal jargon, vague threats, and dramatic language, about irreparable harm to Miss Winter's reputation and malicious intent to undermine legitimate authority. Dahlia, my attorney, reviewed the letter and burst out laughing. "This is a classic slap suit," she said. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're trying to drain your time, money, and mental stamina, not because they think they'll win, but because they think you'll fold." She pointed out multiple flaws in their logic. You didn't defame her. You showed her own rules, her own actions. And what they're calling harassment amounts to you legally parking your boat in your driveway. Then she added with a grin, "I'd be thrilled to take this case pro bono, just to see it get laughed out of court." But Peyton wasn't done. The next morning, I stepped outside to find my car had been vandalized. Someone had spray painted the word Eyesore across the hood in dripping red letters. There was no camera footage of the act, no direct evidence. But the timing and the word choice made the message painfully clear. That same day, the HOA board, clearly still under Peyton's thumb, passed a rushed emergency regulation. No display of HOA documents for purposes of satire, mockery, or public ridicule. Dahlia flagged it immediately. "That's unconstitutional," she said. "Clear First Amendment violation." Rumors started swirling. Someone in the neighborhood claimed I was financially unstable and living on my boat to avoid paying property taxes. Complete fiction, but the whispers spread fast. That's when my sister Ashley flew in from Chicago. Former communications exec for one of the country's top PR firms, she saw the unfolding chaos for what it really was. A public narrative war. "This isn't about the boat anymore, Liam," she said. "It's about control, and Peyton's losing hers." Ashley, Dahlia, and I began working as a team, digging into the documents Ezra had gathered, cross-referencing entries, matching expenditures, and preparing a comprehensive report. Then Peyton made her boldest move yet. She scheduled an unofficial community meeting without notifying me, and placed a motion on the agenda, a vote to use HOA funds to sue me collectively. A power play meant to isolate and bankrupt me, but it backfired, spectacularly, because Peyton's ex-husband, Gregory Winters, showed up. Unexpected, uninvited, and devastatingly honest. A successful businessman and former HOA president himself, Gregory stood up in the middle of the meeting and spoke. "I left Peyton in part because of her misuse of community funds," he said to the stunned crowd. "I covered it up back then to avoid a scandal, but I can't stay silent now." The room fell silent. For once, Peyton had no clever retort. Over the next few days, Ashley and I worked around the clock. We analyzed bank statements, receipts, contracts line by line, personal travel, designer shopping, unauthorized consulting fees. Even that Paris trip? Paid entirely from HOA accounts. "We're not just fighting her ego anymore," Ashley said, her voice low. "We're preparing evidence that could put her in jail." Then came another unexpected call. "Mr. Lawson," the voice said. "This is Mayor Henderson. Peyton Winters just called me about your boat situation. We need to talk." I felt my heart drop. The mayor? Was he going to pressure me too? We met the next day. I brought everything: documents, summaries, timelines. He was a practical man in his late 50s, weary-eyed but attentive. At first his questions were generic: civil disturbances, neighborhood image. But as he flipped through the pages, his tone shifted. "This isn't a petty dispute," he said, now grim. "If this holds up, we're looking at potential fraud and embezzlement charges." Though he couldn't officially intervene in HOA matters, he promised to forward the evidence to the appropriate authorities. His quiet nod was all the endorsement I needed. With his tacit support, Ashley and I organized a lakeside community gathering, a neighborhood barbecue right in my front yard. The now famous boat stood proudly as a centerpiece. We invited everyone. Even Peyton, she didn't show, but dozens of neighbors did, and that evening changed everything. Emily Davidson, a former HOA accountant who'd been mysteriously fired 2 years ago, approached me with a folder. "She fired me when I asked too many questions," Emily said. "About these expenses." She handed me documents showing how Peyton had doctored reports, shifted line items, and concealed personal spending under vague budget codes. Trevor posted a new video summarizing the scandal. It gained 2 million views in 24 hours. A national news network called me the next morning. But something more important happened that night. As people gathered around the fire pit, sharing drinks and stories, I saw something that Peyton had worked. Hard to destroy, community. Under her rule, we'd become isolated. Afraid of one another. Afraid of getting reported for small infractions. But here we were now, laughing, connecting, healing. Someone asked about my boat, so I told them. I told them about Dad, how he taught me to fish, how the boat wasn't just fiberglass and paint, but a place where we made memories. How storing it away on Peyton's demand felt like storing away his memory. I hadn't expected to choke up, but I did. And as I looked around, I saw understanding in their eyes. These weren't strangers anymore, these were neighbors again. The next day, Peyton made her final desperate move. She hired someone to break into my home and steal the documents. But what she didn't know was that my new security system recorded everything. Clear footage, clear evidence. The burglar cracked almost immediately under police questioning and named Peyton. Richard Barnes, the HOA's vice president, saw the writing on the wall. To save himself, he turned over even more documents, implicating Peyton in years of misconduct. Mayor Henderson notified me that both the district attorney and the tax department were now involved. A vote of no confidence was scheduled, and I realized this wasn't about a boat anymore. It was about justice, about truth, about taking back a community from someone who had abused her power for far too long. Then, the night before the vote, my phone buzzed, a text. No name, just a number. "Meet me at the marina, 6 a.m. Bring a recording device. B." It wasn't Peyton. Of that I was sure. But who was B? And what did they want me to hear before the whole house of cards came crashing down? "Just look for the boat with the bylaws." They laughed, unsure if I was joking, but I meant it. That boat wasn't just wood and steel anymore. It was our monument, our turning point. It reminded us that change wasn't handed down from authority, but pulled up from the community's core when good people refused to look the other way. As the sun dipped beneath the tree line, casting long golden streaks across the lake, I looked around at the neighbors gathered by the fire pit. Children chased each other through the grass, someone passed me a plate of brisket, and Dahlia leaned her head on my shoulder. The air was full of laughter, clinking glasses, and a calm that had once felt impossible. The HOA still existed, but now it served us. It protected, it respected, and it listened. I glanced at the boat one last time that evening, its hull freshly painted, its nameplate gleaming under the moonlight. It no longer bore the full wrap of bylaws, but I'd left one line intact, etched, just beneath the waterline, subtle but visible if you knew to look. Sometimes you have to swim against the current to get where you need to go. And we did.